You are now watching Zach Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' peeps? Welcome back to the channel. Zach Lesage here. We are going to be covering over the top 16 decks of the late night number 26 event. This event happened on Monday. There were almost 300 competitors, I think 296 to be exact. And it's one of those things where there's a lot of great decks to look over here. And that's really what the point of this video is, just to kind of share the knowledge of what happens at these events. Now, I do want to be clear, if a deck does well at this event, or if it doesn't if you see a deck that's popular that doesn't necessarily do well at all events, it could just be a one-time occurrence. It might be something to look into. That's really why I try to share and give my opinions. I will be giving my opinions of these deck lists. If you are a player in this tournament and I'm not a fan of your deck list, that's just my personal preference. I try to keep it clean. I try to keep it chill and constructive. If you have any questions, or if you are the player who piloted these decks, or if you're an expert of those decks, let me know in the comments what you think about some of these tech choices, all that great stuff. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We are so close to 10,000, about 500 people away. Can we make it? We are so close. Please, please, please toss that sub out there. That being said, we are going to be jumping into number 16. We have Mill1216. My apologies in advance if I butcher anyone's names. I only read a lot of these usernames. So we're going to be jumping into Jolteon VMAX. Jolteon VMAX is all about using Max Thunder Rumble, doing 100 damage to the active, 100 damage to the bench. 100 damage to the bench only happens if you use something like Headbutt Tantrum or Quick Shooting on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So if we are doing something like that, that's how it's going to be working. So far the list looks pretty normal. And then I see 3 Cheryls and I'm like, whoa, 3 Cheryls? That's something that we don't necessarily see in every single deck. Gotta pause for water, stay hydrated, peeps. Everything else looks pretty normal, and then I'm like, oh, 3 battle VIP pass, weird, and then 2 quick balls and only 2 Path to the Peaks. I think everything else looks normal, but they experimented with the battle VIP pass, lower Path to the Peak, and Cheryl. So let me kind of explain my thoughts on it. Cheryl is a card that I almost want to cut from Jolteon. I think one is necessary still. It's one of those points where I guess if I think like that, there's obviously got to be a polar opposite opinion where they want to play more Cheryl because they think it's going to be more good, I guess. Sure. We got Battle VIP Pass. Battle VIP Pass I do not think works in this deck. Obviously you could play it, but playing only 3 gives you a lesser chance of drawing into it on your first turn. And what are you really trying to draw? Your 50% chance of playing it, otherwise you're just going to be using Keep Calling, and then you could kind of do the same effect. You only have 8 Pokemon and 4 of them search for themselves. I mean, you might be looking at Zigzagoon, but are you really going to try to put Headbutt Tantrum that you can only play when you play down from your hand with Battle VIP Pass? Playing a lack of Quick Balls also hurts that fact as well. And I just feel like it just doesn't make sense at all. I mean, that's probably that's probably about as blunt as I'll get. I think that 3 Battle VIP Pass in Jolteon does not make sense to me. If anyone feels like they like Battle VIP Pass in Jolteon, by all means let me know. I'd rather be seeing Capture Energies. I'd rather be seeing more Quick Balls. I'd rather be seeing stuff like that. And I also think that 4 Path to the Peak is probably very good in this metagame just to beat Mew. 3 Path to the Peak doesn't beat Mew, so there's a certain point where you are playing 4, or I think you should be playing 0. Maybe like 2 is probably fine. I don't know. It's one of those things where the Battle VIP Pass is the part that kind of scares me the most with this list. But by all means, if you are the player who piloted this deck, or if you feel like you want to talk about the Battle VIP Pass in the comments below, let me know. Now, if you are trying to pick up a Jolteon VMAX deck, or kind of any of the decks from this video, or any deck in general, cards, whatever, go to PTCGO plug in code ZLesage5. You could save 5% on your next order of codes, especially with Brilliant Stars coming up. It would really help support me as a content creator. I do get a little bit of a splashback, I'll be completely transparent, but it does really help support my content, so it's the freest way for you to get a discount on the codes and help out your boy Zach. If you are trying to grow your game with Brilliant Stars coming out, there's in real life events looking like they're coming back. We have online events that I run myself and a lot of other players run in the community. By all means, feel free to pick up some coaching from me at metafy.gg/@ZachLesage. That link's in the description. I could really help you grow your game to the next level, how to pilot these decks, whatever you're really looking for. I'm only a DM away, and you could always just book on Metafy and we could discuss there as well. That being said, cool list, definitely unique, but they did make top 16. Like, I can't necessarily knock it. I just do not think I would ever play that myself. We do have Kevin Abernathy coming up at number 15. Definitely a player that I recognize there. So going 4-3 with the Mew VMAX. Now that's a debate lately. A lot of players are playing 3-2 Mew VMAX, 4-2 Mew VMAX. I think Mew VMAX, it's one of those things where, like, if you prize one or you have to discard one, it can be really difficult, but you aren't playing research, so you are the one who decides if you are going to be discarding one. I think playing 3-2 seems completely fine, or sorry, 4-2 seems completely fine, but 4-3 is still the standard. I do like the 4-2 more than I do like 3-2, but I also like 4-3. So I like 4 Mew V, and I like 2 or 3 Mew VMAX. Anything else beyond that is just a little bit less than what I'd like to see. Obviously, the goal of this deck is to be using Cross Fusion Strike to copy different attacks. You have access to Psychic Leap, Techno Blast, and Melodious Echo. Those are the 3 strongest attacks that you're likely going to be copying the most, but there are other ones such as Energy Mix, Max Miracle, etc. You do have ways to accelerate energies, power things up with extra damage, with power tablets. They do play an extra energy. Like, I'm looking through this list, and I think this list looks great. I like the extra Alice's Sparkle. I like all the choice that they made. I do like Pokemon Catcher in this deck. I really don't have any issues at all when it comes down to it. I think this list looks great. It might not be the exact same list that I have. I don't think I have any Pokemon Catchers in this deck, and I only play 3 Alice's Sparkles. I think those cards come from the Great Balls that I play in my deck. I think that those cards seem like appropriate changes. So by all means, try out Kevin's list. I think it looks great. Shout out to Kevin. I wonder what deck they lost to. I won't necessarily go this for everyone. They lost to a Suicune Inteleon deck. That could happen, I guess. I think that deck plays Path to the Peak. Yeah, so you can just sometimes fold to Path to the Peak. We will be jumping on, though, to number 14, A. Nunez, playing Rapid Strike Urshifu with Galarian Moltres. So a little bit of a teched out list, something that we haven't necessarily seen here. Most lists do run Inteleon. When it comes to playing this deck looks like it's going to be half Rapid Strike in the front, Galarian Moltres in the back. So we have the G-Max Rapid Flow, where they're going to be doing, you just want to be doing 120, 120. They don't necessarily play ways to expand upon that, so it might just be Gale Thrust, and might be just the strong fighting type Pokemon against Gengar and Jolteon and Eternatus. And then, of course, it's a really heavy focus on Dark-type Pokemon with the Galarian Moltres and Sableye and all this good stuff with the energy switch. I think it's a fine list. I really don't have any issues with it. The supporter line's a little bit weird with the 1 Piers, 1 Avery, 1 Zinnias, but obviously it worked for this player. I don't know, like, there's little things that are off. Like, I think if I'm playing a Rapid Strike, maybe 3 Rapid Strike energies is cool. Maybe only playing 3 is too little when it comes to a deck like this. I think there's definitely some struggle points when it comes down to it. So it's not really looking to use G-Max Rapid Flow over and over again. As far as I can tell, it looks like it's using Gale Thrust. Gale Thrust, also, you only have 3 energies that you can search for. You have no way to really grab them except Raihan. I mean, again, I like this build of the deck a lot more with the different type of dark attackers. I don't necessarily like every individual card, but that's up for A. Nunez to decide. It's one of those things where I probably wouldn't play this deck in general. I'd rather be playing the Gengar VMAX deck as a dark and fighting deck with a single strike Urshifu V in the deck, or I'd rather be playing single strike. I often bring these up in my top 10 deck videos where I just kind of look at the typing, and I think that they're both trying to accomplish the same thing. However, this deck did do quite well, making top 16, so maybe it's something to look into. It's one of those things where I can't always be right as a player, and when there's so many different decks that are viable, there's only so much that I can cover or test or understand in a certain metagame. So check this out if you are looking for a Rapid Strike deck. Beyond that, I would probably recommend another Fighting and Dark deck. Overall, I think there's some that have proven a little bit more success. However, this build is a little under-tested in my, just under-tested by the community as a whole. So shout out to them. I wonder what deck they lost to. We're going to go to their matches. They ended up losing to Mew. So, I mean, if you're not beating Mew necessarily, they also lost to Mew again there. So they went 2-1 against Mew in the day. I really think that it's probably worthwhile to look into other decks that have a stronger Mew matchup. We're going to be moving on to Josh Cohen playing Leafeon VMAX. So this is something that I predicted when it came to my top 10, is that Leafeon V-Star will breathe some life into this deck. I'm not entirely sure how this deck still beats a lot of the decks that it's supposed to face. Like, I don't think this deck beats Jolteon. I don't think this deck beats Mew. I think it struggles against both those decks actually greatly. The build looks great. I mean, this is, to me, I think looks like an absolute banger build. Like, I don't see really much that I would change. My only issue when it comes down to it is how do you get past those matchups? I want to see what they were able to go here. So Shadow Rider, Duraludon, Gengar, cool. I don't know how they beat Gengar. Gengar usually plays Triple Hiding Dark. They lost to Mew. It's a tough matchup. They lost to Mew again. They lost to Jolteon, and they lost to Jolteon. So literally the matchups that I think that I said they were losing to Mew and Jolteon, they ended up losing to Mew and Jolteon. Don't know how they beat Gengar. I do want to check the deck list again. They do play 2 Fan of Waves, so maybe that's enough to get around the Hiding Darks. Beyond that, I think that this deck is strictly a metagame call. Might get better during Brilliant Stars. Do not think it's worthwhile to play at this point. Again, with Mew and Jolteon being 2 of the most successful decks that we have in format. But shout out to Josh for bringing a cool deck to the mix. We see Lee Bui bringing... sorry, I guess I didn't necessarily explain the strategy there. So for that deck, it is to use Leafeon VMAX, Galar Mine, increase for your damage or your opponent's retreat costs. So I do want to share that quickly before we move on. For the Rapid Strike deck, I think we briefly went over it, but you're being half fighting, half dark. So really type advantage than any kind of set strategy. Moving on to Lee Bui playing Victini VMAX. I think this is their updated list. They were able to make top 8 last week, if I remember correctly. Their whole goal is basically max victory, boss's orders, Pokemon catchers, and they have a bunch of disruption cards with Path to the Peak, Crushing Hammer, and Fan of Waves. So pretty cool list. I do think that max victory is underrated. Victini VMAX obviously being underrated when it comes to the format. Will it get better with Brilliant Stars? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure, but it is one of those things where I do want to look at the matchups instead of like looking at the list. I don't really see any issues with the list. They are the person that created that deck. I'm not necessarily here to kind of talk down to their deck or anything else like that. They definitely know what they're doing when it comes down to it. So they were able to beat, they lost to Gengar, they lost to Gengar, they lost to Mew. Makes sense. They probably beat Jolteon because they don't have too many bait Pokemon in play. They hit Flareon, which, I mean, should probably be a win. So they had a pretty good run. I'm not entirely sure how they ended up beating Ice Rider. Maybe the Ice Rider just got off to a poor start. They hit a really weird mix of decks. So I think Lee had one of those runs where you just take those, especially when you're hitting decks like Flareon, Dracozolt, Leafeon, Sylveon. Those are decks that are just really underrepresented. It makes sense that they lost to the Galarian Dark Box deck. So it is one of those things where overall great showing from Lee. Understandable finish overall, but always seeing success with that Victini deck. We are going to see another Jolteon deck, so we'll see if it's a little bit different than what we saw before. So yeah, this looks like a pretty bang, like straight up list. 4-3, 4-4, 2-1, 2-4. Yeah, everything to me looks exactly the same way that I'd probably be playing it. This list looks absolutely amazing. I probably wouldn't change a thing. I like this one a lot more than the Battle VIP Pass one. So if you are looking for kind of a tried and true version of Jolteon, I would recommend playing this particular build. I wonder what they lost to in top. Gengar. Gengar can be a bit of a struggle point for Jolteon if they do get set up. So moving on to Beast Boys playing the kind of Dark Box deck. So this deck playing the Inteleon line to kind of search things out. The goal of this deck is to really sacrifice one prize card Pokemon, neutralizing Gas, Weezing, or the Galarian Moltres with Malevolent Charge. You got Sableye that you can kind of sweep up with. So either like late game, you're going to be sacrificing, early game, you're sacrificing Hoopas or Galarian Weezings as single prize card Pokemon, while you either build on damage for your opponent so you can hit them with Crazy Claws, or your opponent draws prize cards so you can hit them with Fiery Wrath. They have a Galarian Urshifu V-Tech for their Jolteon matchup. Beyond that, I mean, I think this is a pretty standard list. If anything, this looks very similar to Azul's list that they were playing. I think that this deck is very good. Not really much that I would change about this list, unless, of course, you don't want to play the Rapid Strike Urshifu V-Line. But overall, I think this looks like a solid version of the deck. We'll have to see what they lost to. I mean, that's the way that I look at it. I really don't have any issues with it. They lost to a Rapid Strike Urshifu. Rapid Strike Urshifu and Jolteon are both tough matchups. That's why I wouldn't necessarily tech the Rapid Strike Urshifu in the deck to try to beat just Jolteon, because you do lose to Rapid Strike Urshifu as well. They lost to Leafeon. That's kind of weird. Had a really strong run. One thing that I do want to recommend for people, it's not a good idea to tie in phase 1. So you're 3, 4, 5, 6. At that point, they already made cut at 6-1. When they tied against Gengar, they had a favorable matchup. They could have advanced on a little bit easier instead of having to go 4-1 in phase 2. So by tying early in the tournaments, you might guarantee yourself making phase 2, but it is one of those things where your record does carry over from phase 1 to phase 2, especially with in real life regionals coming up. If you're tying into $250 cash at a regionals, that's cool. That's a different motive. Here, you're not tying into any kind of prize pool. unless of course you make it into the top 16. So going 4-1 is a lot better than trying to turn those ties, which didn't necessarily change anything. Those ties literally could have been losses and they still probably would have advanced. So just throwing that out there, that it's worthwhile to see exactly what's going on here. So totally check that out. If you are a player that typically just ties, not really worth it. If your opponent's asking you to tie, they probably don't know what's going on, or it's a favorable matchup for them. I think both of those matchups would have been favorable for Beast Boys had they played it out. So just not to put Beast Boys on the spot, it is one of those things that I see a lot of players do. I figured I'd address it in case anyone's trying to wondering why they're sitting in the middle of the pack and not necessarily making it to top 16. I mean, Beast Boys did beast out and totally make it into top 16, but they did make it a little bit more difficult for them. So we are going to be moving on to Rain playing Ice Rider. I mean, Ice Rider's a deck that pops up here and there. They have access to Rider the High King or Max Lance. You powered up with Melanie, all good stuff. They do have a Rapid Strike Urshifu. I guess that's really to try to beat the Jolteon matchup. Or maybe the Gengar matchup. I really don't think that card's necessary when it comes to this one. I can understand if you were playing like kind of Suicune Melanie, but this deck is not weak to lightning. I found that the matchups for both Gengar and Jolteon are very close when it comes to Ice Rider, so I do not like that deck there at all. I think it's a little bit unnecessary in my testing. We'll have to see how their day went out, but otherwise I wouldn't really change too much with their list. So had a really strong phase 1 of Swiss, crushing through everything. They didn't really get to try it against anything as far as I can tell, so it's one of those things where I don't think it necessarily helped them or hurt them. They just hit a bunch of Mews, did pretty well against that. So shout out to Rain there. We will be moving into Dauber, the player that always plays Galarian Sirfetch'd V, and this is actually one of my favorite decks in the format right now. So the whole goal of this deck is to go Strong Legs Charge, rip some fighting energies down into play. Then you want to be using Galarian Sirfetch'd V to swoop into play, attacking, so you're that fighting kind of deck. And then you also have the Darkness style for the same way that Galarian Weezing, you're kind of sacrificing prize cards early on, then attacking with Galarian Moltres late game. Sacrificing Chinchino, Snorlax, Hoopas, whatever. I think that this build looks particularly strong. I'm pretty happy to see how it all plays out. Really not much that I would change. So if you are looking for an interesting Dark and Fighting deck, I know that this one doesn't necessarily get as high ranked as other decks like Single Strike or Gengar or anything else like that. I think it's just due to lack of play. This deck I think is severely underrated, and I recommend that most players give it a try. Most cards are really cheap. Like I said, go to PTCGO plug in code Lesage5. I'm sure you could even probably pick up the Galarian Sirfetch'd promos there pretty cheap. So shout out to Dauber. What deck really took them down? I think, yeah, you got the Galarian Moltres deck. That might be difficult for them to deal with the neutralizing gas ability. So we're going to be moving on to Jared W. playing Rapid Strike. Okay, oh, this is Rapid Strike Blaziken. Gotcha. So the whole goal here is to, I guess, just be fighting and fire type. I think that sounds kind of cool. If I remember correctly, Tor is the one that kind of came up with this concept. So I guess the goal is to have Cheryl, and then you can attack, go into your Blaziken, go ahead and use Max Blaze, recover your energies, and you're chilling for the game. So I guess you're kind of just some kind of like what we see with the Metagross deck that's seeing some success lately. You just kind of Rapid Strike, get them back, and attach them to your Pokemon. Cheryl, get them back in the back. I mean, I guess it's kind of cool. Kind of like Inteleon VMAX deck. I'm not sure how I feel about this deck. It's something that I haven't got a chance to try out myself. So if I do get the chance to try this deck out, I totally will give you an update. So I can't necessarily tell you if this list looks good, if this deck's great or not, anything else like that. I have zero testing experience with it. Let me know if you tested this deck below in the comments. I'd totally love to hear what's going on there. What did they lose to? They lost to kind of a water deck. That makes a lot of sense. So we're going to be moving on to Jonathan Patricio playing Jolteon. So we have seen Jonathan Patricio see a lot of success here. They do play the one copy of Capture Energy. I know we went over Jolteon VMAX before. I don't necessarily like the one copy of Capture Energy. I don't see how you're ever going to search it out. I'd like to see like 2 or 3. I also do not like only one copy of Boss's Orders. Beyond that, Jonathan Patricio always sees success at my events and is a kind of really great player as far as I can tell. So shout out to them. Their consistent results always prove themselves. Maybe one capture energy is a little bit better. I'd personally like to have the third lightning energy. I'd personally like to have a second boss, but that's really a me kind of issue. Moving on to Azul GG, the man, the legend himself, playing Mew VMAX with only the 3-2 Mew. Kind of a bit of a weird take on it, but it is what it is. I don't necessarily like 3-2 Mew. I'd rather see a 4th Mew. And the reason why I'd rather see a 4th Mew is because playing 3-2 gives you a higher chance of seeing non-Mew cards. I'd rather not start with Genesect V. I'd rather start with Mew V because it has free retreat and it gives me more options. Maybe I want to go for that Mellow at a Donk. I do think that 2 copies of Boss and 3 copies of Catchers is a fair count. I do think a lot of the cards that Azul plays in this list is totally valid. And I think the 3 switch, 1 escape rope count sounds great. I have played switching cups in my list before. Sounds great. I think I'd just rather, like, if we took this list, cut the Pokegear for a 4th Mew, and then maybe cut a catcher for another, maybe not a boss. I mean, I think if you just cut the Pokegear for a 4th Mew, I'd be so much happier. Beyond that, it's one of those things where this list just seems solid. Maybe you just don't need that other Mew VMAX, and it gets to use that space to play things like switching cups, catchers, all that stuff. Seems like a super solid list, and I think it's worthwhile for a lot of people to check out. Not entirely sure what they lost to. They lost to Gengar. Gengar is pretty much impossible to beat for Mew. Don't want to say it's entirely impossible, but we'll have to see. We got Doubles, my homie Doubles. Shout out to Doubles. Check them out on Twitch. You got 4-3 Mew VMAX. I think this is just a pretty standard list. If anything, they're playing Catcher Mew, so lower on the boss, heavier on the catchers. So where Azul played switching cups and catchers, Doubles is just playing catchers, and they do play an extra energy in case they run into Duraludon. I think Mew lists can largely just go down to 6 energies when it comes down to Mew, because Duraludon's not seeing a lot of play, but when I say that, a lot of people are probably going to play Duraludon, so keep it in mind what you're trying to expect and understand what's going on there. So shout out to Doubles there, losing again to Gengar. Gengar tearing up those Mews. We do have Nick H playing Suicune. So I've never been a huge fan of the Suicune build. This is very similar to the Ice Rider deck, except instead of Ice Rider being evolution, you have access to Suicune as a basic attacker, you have Crushing Hammers, and it's kind of the same kind of vibes. I think that maybe Suicune, it's just a really good path deck, is probably the best way that I put it. Path and Disruption can carry you a lot. Is this the best vessel for it? Maybe. That might be why we're seeing a little bit more play from this one than not, but it is one of those things where I think it's really solid overall. I'm just not a personal fan of Suicune, and that's just me. I don't think I'd necessarily change too much when it comes to this build. I think this build looks great. I'd like to see maybe like more of the level balls, but obviously you got to come up with some different kind of things here. Yeah, I really don't think I'd change too much from this list. I think the list looks solid. Shout out to Nick. I wonder what deck they lost to. They ended up losing to Urza with the Galarian Moltres deck. Cool. So we are going to be jumping into our finalists. We have Ultra NKO playing Gengar VMAX. I do believe this is the exact list that I posted on my channel a while back. I don't see any changes here. So the goal of Gengar is to really have a strong Mew matchup. You do have Single Strike Urshifu to beat Jolteon and other Gengar decks. I've brought this up a lot of times, how I think this is just a better Single Strike build because it's more consistent and focused. You don't necessarily have two kind of things of Umbreon and Urshifu. Gengar can kind of handle most. If you do run into a deck that's fighting type, you can play Gengar V as a strong attacker and kind of tone down your prize cards. So if you find yourself struggling at all when it comes to Pokemon, tone down your prize cards to match your opponent's prize output, or try to surpass them and offer up less prize cards. That's why when you see a tech like Morpeko that knocks out a Mew VMAX to 1 prize card, knocking out a 3 prize card, it's worth a lot more in the game in the grand scheme of things. So I really don't see any issues with this list. I have seen players cut down to 3 Path to the Peaks just because of Duraludon. I don't necessarily dislike that, so it is something to consider. I mean, we know how they lost in the finals. We do have the grand finals for this week. I'm going to get back to putting those up as long as people are willing to record. So shout out to Ultra NKO. We will be moving on to Urtzub playing the Galarian Moltres kind of toolbox. I mean, I think that this particular build looks great. I really don't see too many differences than most common lists. The only differences that I see are a Zigzagoon here, which could be good with the Crazy Claws. I only see 1 Sableye V. I'd probably want to see that as a 2nd Sableye V. And we do see a copy of Avery. So the Avery might, I don't know how it necessarily helps things out, but I do think that this build is solidified. We saw this before with the Rapid Strike Urshifu and the single Rapid Strike energy. I think this particular build looks great, and again, you can watch the whole grand finals here. Let's look at their kind of run, seeing what they ran through. So they only took 3 losses all day. They lost to an Ice Rider. I think that can necessarily happen if you got a tough start. Probably lost Rapid Strike because Rapid Strike is unfavorable, and they can just go G-Max Rapid Flow. You have access, Mew can be just super quick, but they had a very strong 8-1 Swiss, and then a little bit of a weaker phase 2, but that's what you see a lot of players. They kind of hit some tough matchups that they probably don't want to face, and then had a very strong, obviously undefeated top cut run. So shout out to Ertzub and everyone else who played in here. I do cover these videos every single week, so check those out. They are different than my top 10 and top 20 videos because they do feature players that you might not necessarily always see. They feature new deck lists that you might not always see, new ideas, like we saw Azul's take on Mew VMAX. We saw Mills take on Jolteon VMAX. We see a lot of different decks, right? Like, it's one of those things where I do like looking at the different decks. And again, let me know in the comments. It does really help boost the YouTube algorithm if you comment. If you got anything to spark a discussion, I do get back to every single person comments. Like I said, always give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you are looking to pick up any of the cards for these decks, you can go to PTCGO plug in code ZLesage5 to save 5% on your next order of codes. Or you could go to metafy.gg/@ZachLesage. If you are trying to grow in the game, you can pick up some coaching there as well. I do offer like personal coaching, and I will totally help you get to whatever level you're kind of trying to get to. So really appreciate everyone tuning into this video. I will catch up with all y'all later. Peace out and have a great one.